Well, good evening, everybody. Good evening and a very warm welcome to this meeting of the Edinburgh Saltwater Scot Club. Thank you very much for being here for this evening's event, and I want to personally also welcome you on an historic occasion for this year, which is, you might think it has a connection with Water Scot, but actually it's just the first day that it hasn't rained. So well done all for being here on this particular day. But no, of course, we're joined here for a far more exciting reason than that, and that's of course to hear a wonderful talk this evening. So without any further ado, I'd like to introduce our speaker for this evening. Greg Moodie is the author of Cool Scots, a psychedelic reimagining of Scotland's rich and varied past, borrowing Byrne's semi-fictional or factually dubious account of the making of his series of Tam O Shanter murals and 3 cartoon compendiums. He's also written a novel, 6 Degrees of Stupidity, and published a weekly comic strip since 2012. A fine art graduate of Duncan of Jordanston College of Art, an exhibition of his paintings Poetic License was staged at the Scottish Poetry Library in 2022, featuring reimaginings of well-known Caledonian writers. And I believe it's a reimagining of just one of those such, Scott, that we're being invited to join Greg in exploring this evening. So Greg, thank you very much for being here. Welcome, and over to you.
Thank you. Thank you very much for having me. It's really a most unusual place for me to be invited to, and shortly you'll probably find out why. I think my social status is technically riffraff, sort of one below pleb, I think, but it's really great to have made it here tonight, and I look forward to being thrown out later. So the thing I probably won't be saying an awful lot about tonight is Walter Scott. The reason being that you all know way more about him than I do, but I would still very much like to tell you how our paths crossed and how I came to take such appalling liberties with this original painting by Henry Raeburn. When I was growing up, I had a very different idea about fine art. I'm originally from Dundee, and my mum worked for DC Thompson's, I kid you not, and so I was very used to having the Beano and the Dandy, and Urwally and the Bruins were big favourites. And from a very young age, I was always trying to do my own cartoons, and I just loved the idea of telling a story with pictures and words together. And so I actually have one that I did. I was 11 when I did this, and if I can just try and remember what was going on in my head at this point, this is basically me presenting a TV channel, I think, and the eye at the start is the cameraman filming the proceedings. It moves on to an advert for HP Beans. Don't ask me why. This is obviously, this is a long time ago. Moves on to Jimmy Hill presenting Sports Reel. Now, I don't know, 11 years old, I've got no idea. And then Jimmy Hill goes on to present a wrestling match, and as you can see, this is how the wrestling ends up. And I still think that's probably one of the best drawings I've ever done. That's very sophisticated for 11, I would have thought. So I went on to study fine art at Duncan and Jordanston and Dundee. And that was a magnificent education in many ways. The only thing I really didn't learn was how to get a job, actually. But that really didn't worry me all that much. Getting a job was quite low on my priorities. Still is, really. And the sort of work that I was... let me tell you about the lecturers, by the way, because the lecturers, they were all magnificent. They were all really good painters in their own way. despite their very obvious failings. What can I tell you about that other than that McGonagall's bar was directly across the road? Let's just leave it at that. But I can remember at least one really smart thing that every single lecturer said to me. And one thing that stuck in my head was one of my classmates complained to a tutor. He said, all the important art movements have happened. Everything's been done. And the tutor said, they haven't been done by you. And I just thought that was the smartest thing I've ever heard, actually. And I think this has kind of made a lasting impression on me. So I was always quite torn between being a painter and a graphic designer. And this is the sort of work that I was doing at art college. This one's called, I really want to be an abstract expressionist. So I was quite happy doing this kind of work, but I also kind of wanted to do graphic stuff as well. And as soon as I got out of college, I started doing cartoons again, and I developed this style using photographs and collage. And it was actually, this is long before the personal computer. So it was a very painstaking process doing this thing. I used to photograph my friends or source pictures of famous people like Mr. T or Ringo. And then I would be drawing around them, tracing around them, reducing and enlarging them, this kind of thing, and then collaging everything together and fixing them up from there. I think what I've always done is found really convoluted ways of using photographs in my drawings, and I think, you know, it's actually a testament to my commitment to make drawings that didn't look like they were entirely hand drawn. There's a photographic element because these were really very difficult to do. And then, of course, these came along, and everything kind of changed with the home computer. I thought this was the most wonderful toy, the home computer. It was, and I use the word toy because I've always thought that I was playing, really, when I was working with these things. I was always playing with images, and it was always like a fun thing to me. And I think the 90s and 2000s, I designed everything. I realized I could be a commercial designer, and I really did design everything. I did TV programs, adverts, product labels, websites. I did 3D accident reconstructions for court cases. I worked for all the big banks before the crash, and I believe Walter Scott too fell victim to a banking crisis, which goes to show that some things really never change. I don't really have anything much to show for all those years, apart from a house, because it was quite ephemeral work. It would just, the job came in, it was there for a particular item that you were trying to sell, and then it was away again. But the one thing that does keep coming back is a series of TV programs that I was involved in. These were serious wartime documentaries, and I did all the graphic content for the shows. And I remember that the reason that it was Polygram that commissioned this. And by the way, the idea of Polygram commissioning a ragtag bunch of drunks from Newington, which is where we worked at the time, I really couldn't believe this was happening. And then to go on, Americans, Time Life, commissioned us to do the battlefield of Vietnam story. I mean, imagine you're going to tell the story of the Vietnam War to America from Newington, you know. But that's actually what happened. But like I say, everything else that I was doing, kind of just I don't really have any record of it, and that was okay because I got quite well paid for it, and then that allowed me to do some of the other things that I really wanted to do, like this. Yes, I was always going to be coming back to cartoons. It's just like an obsession with me, really. I've done a cartoon every week since 2012, I think, and I've never missed a single week, and I just pick up on whatever's happening in the news. So this was when Nigel Farage came up to Edinburgh, and he went to the Canonsgate bar and ended up getting locked inside it because of protests going on outside. So I had, this was a whole strip of Nigel singing this song, Don't You Wish Your Girlfriend? And he's doing all the poses and everything. So he's always been good value for cartoons, if nothing else. Duke of York, obviously, it's always been quite a regular, at least in recent years, and the royals generally. And I did quite a lot of the Queen while she was still around. As you can see, some of these cartoons get quite sophisticated, subject matter, and these are quite recent. And as you can see, I started cutting them out again, so I was actually doing them on the computer and then printing them out, cutting them up, and then photographing them again. So I was getting back into what I started off doing with collaging. I think I've got a thing for collage. Gordon Brown, I've always depicted Gordon Brown as a dinosaur. Don't ask me why. This chap you might recognise, he just won the Rochdale by-election. So you can see we're getting quite recent here. George Galloway, of course, is a fellow Dundonian. And so I did one cartoon, I think this one was called Dundee Fruitcake. And this is the most recent one here, and as you can imagine, there isn't anything very funny to say about the current situation going on, but you know, I've always sort of thought that was a satirist's challenge, really. You've got to find the thing that you can poke fun of, and in this case it was Rishi Sunak talking to Netanyahu about his career goals and such like that, because that's kind of where Sunak's coming from, really, isn't it? So I'm giving you a selection of these cartoons because what I've always done is, in between other things, whenever it comes to the weekend, I stop everything, whatever I'm doing, and I do the cartoon. So I'm going to backtrack now. And in 2016, I was approached by the landlord of the Torfickan Inn, which happens to be my local bar in West Lothian. And the landlord had heard that I was some kind of artist. I don't think he knew what kind of artist. I think he just thought it was a sort of artist that spends a lot of time in bars, you know, that type of artist, which wasn't really all that far from the truth. And what he said to me was, how do you fancy doing a set of murals in the bar? And he even had a theme that he wanted to do, and it was a Tam O Shanter, Robert Burns, and he had a selection of these old Victorian copper plates, and he said to me, I think there was 4 of them, and they told the story in exactly the same way that a cartoon would. There's a visual depiction and there's a bit of narration underneath, quoting directly from the poem. And I said to him, okay, so that's what I'll do. I'll just do, I can do this, and we'll take it clockwise around the room as if you were reading left to right, and start the story there and end it in the opposite corner. And what I did, of course, was I have to get photographs into these somehow. And once again, I found the most convoluted way possible of bringing photographs into what I was doing. Because what I did was I photographed all the regulars and all the locals from Torfaken, and then projected them, collaged them on a computer, and then used a projector to project onto the wall, and then painted and drew around them just to get the look that I was going for. And this was the kind of result. And all these guys are well known to me in the village.
Still.
And a little self-portrait on the left there. My friend Aaron was happy to pose as Tam himself, and as you can see, it's still very cartoony. It's taking the story, but just doing it as if it was a comic strip. And this is actually it in place. And what actually happened here was there were 7 panels, and 6 of them I had an idea of what I was doing. And then on the 7th one, I didn't know what on earth I was going to do with the 7th one, and I carried on. I was in denial about it, really, and I carried on and finished all the others and got them up to scratch. And then the landlord once again came to the rescue, and he said, "Why don't you do a portrait of Robert Burns?" I said, "Well, that's perfect." And this is what I came up with. And I flipped the original painting. I can't remember who did the original painting. Right, yes. And the reason I've turned it left to right was simply because of what I just said about it reading like a book. It has to read left to right, so when you get to the end, it needs to lead on to the next one. Anyway, he just about had a fit when he saw what I'd done, because I think he was expecting a kind of tartan and shortbread type of approach, like what you might see in some of the shops on the street. But he was happy enough about it. He said it was cool. He said that people kept telling him that it was cool, and he said this in a way that it sounded like he didn't know what it meant. And that was okay, because that just put something else in my head. And the other thing that he said was, he asked me how I came up with it. And I said I was just playing. So I think this is a key thing in what I do most. I'm trying to avoid work, basically. Anyway, so having told Robert Burns's tale, I then wanted to tell a tale of my own. And I produced this book, Borrowing Burns. And it's factually dubious. I thought that was a better way of saying it's part fiction. It's actually all fiction. It's how these murals came to be. And it's got a quote from the poet Alan Bissett on the back. And it says, "Greg Moodie tackles Robert Burns in a pub. What could go wrong?" I always loved that. The reason it's called Borrowing Burns is that Burns had no actual association with Torfaken and West Lothian at all. But I wasn't going to let that stop me, because I thought, to quote that other great poet, Ur Wully, he's Ur Rabbi, you're Rabbi, Abadi's Rabbi. And I'd just like to read you a page from this book. I'd imagine you're all very into your historical fiction, and this page is all about how the Torfichan Inn came to be established, and it's from a chapter called The History Thing. Torfichan, Hill of the Ravens, was established around one of the highest peaks in central Scotland, Cairnpapel, a prehistoric settlement with standing stones and burial mounds. Residents of Torfichan have always been very good at burying people. We can only hope most of them were dead first. No murals have been unearthed from this period, but I imagine this is due to the scarcity of plasterboard in Neolithic West Lothian. Artistic expression was confined to beard decorating, although where they got the glitter from is anybody's guess. In the 1100s, the village was a magnet for men in cloaks. They came from far and wide to do good deeds, admire each other's robes, and generally hang out in the Torfichan Preceptory, which, with its surrounding walls still intact, was presumably a bit less drafty than it is now. They were called the Knights of St. John. You could probably just Google it. The Preceptory was also home to the first Scottish Parliament, convened by William Wallace, knight and sworn enemy of the reigning monarch, King Edward I. For his troubles, Wallace was hung, drawn and quartered by Edward, who, concerned he might try it again, was taking no chances. It's unlikely that Wallace would be too happy about Scotland's current political situation, or indeed the fact that Mel Gibson made a film about him. But I suppose these are minor gripes compared to the whole hung, drawn and quartering thing, which was far from ideal. In 1880, a group of wise, parched locals decided that temperance wasn't their style, and that there should be a bar in the village state. They'd seen other village states with bars, and didn't see why they had to go there to carouse, fall down and punch a policeman, when they could easily do the same here. So the old livery stable in the village square was converted, and the Torfichan Inn was born. At that point, the bar was just a single room, the room now known as the Burns Bar. There was no function suite, as there were no Elvis tribute acts until the 1890s. So you get the idea, right? So just to pick up on that, what the landlord had said about it being cool, that to me was an obvious kick-off point for another project. If I could make one of these great old guys look cool, why couldn't you just do a whole book of them? And so Robert Louis Stevenson on the cover, of course, he's actually wearing Jimi Hendrix's tunic and John Lennon's glasses. Hence, it's just, that's the way I collage things. Total magpie. So I'll just show you a few of these. Can anybody hazard a guess as to who this cool looking chap is?
Alexander Graham Bell.
The clue is in the phone, obviously. Yes, Alexander Graham Bell. Lots of telephone references, selfie stick, SIM card. You get the idea. But this is actually based on a photograph of Bell. That was his face. I think I just tweaked his moustache, actually, and perhaps worked on his quiff a little bit. But that's actually his face. Any guesses?
Muriel Spark.
Muriel Spark, absolutely. You can tell, if you look for a little while, you'll see Jean Brodie, the school where the Prime Minister Jean Brodie was set, things like that. Gave Muriel Spark a choker, which she would not be happy with, I don't think. This is less obvious because when you see pictures of this guy, and there are photographs, you generally see him as an old man.
He's got a Dunfermline athletic badge.
He's got a Dunfermline athletic FC badge on. Andrew Carnegie. Yes.
Well done.
Lots of steel references, obviously. Cutlery, yeah. Okay. I defy anybody to guess this one. This is probably the oldest one in the book. So instead of being based on a photograph, it's based on a painting. Okay, Jacobite hero. Flora MacDonald. Indeed, yes. And as I say, it is the face, and if I should have actually shown you the original painting, then you could have seen, but...
hairdo by?
Hairdo, yes, good question. This one's fairly straightforward. No? Yes, Ivor Cutler. I thought that was obvious. I mean, I didn't actually do very much to the image of Ivor himself. I thought everybody would just get it. Ivor Cutler seemed to have always looked like that, whatever age he was. Nan Shepherd, indeed. And this picture actually led to another development. And I should say, by the way, that Walter Scott isn't in this book. And, you know, he's got a bloody great monument along the road. I don't think he's going to be too upset. But, yeah, just to give you a flavour of the Cool Scots book, which is here, by the way. I would like to read you the page that I wrote about Nan Shepherd. Now each of the profiles in the book, there is a painting on one page, and on the opposite page there is a little potted biography, and written in very much in the same style as the style that I can do. I only have one style. Between 1928 and 1933, Anna Nan Shepherd wrote 3 novels which are widely considered to be high water marks in Scottish modernist literature: The Quarry Wood, The Weather House, and A Pass in the Grampians. She never wrote another, and one can only wonder if the experience of dealing with publishers was just too traumatic for her. She certainly seemed to prefer teaching to going near another one, which is really saying something. Shepherd was born and raised in the suburbs of Aberdeen, and although widely travelled, remained there throughout her life. An avid hill walker, her main attraction to the area seems to have been the nearby Grampian Mountains, which stretch across almost half of Scotland's landmass. Aberdonians generally can't get very far without bumping into one. Shepherd's affinity with the terrain was deep-seated, and sometime in the 1940s she wrote The Living Mountain, a non-fiction work of poetic prose that explored her close relationship with the land. It was well before its time, an early example of what we now call nature writing, and all the more unusual for being a female perspective on what was then something you might do only if you sported substantial beardage. But Shepherd sat on the manuscript for 30 years, presumably reluctant to have another conversation with a publisher, which admittedly can be life-shortening. It was 1977 before she summoned the strength to make that call, and The Living Mountain is now regarded as her masterpiece. In 2016, Shepherd was rewarded for her work and her courage in the face of publishing houses by becoming the first woman to appear on a Scottish £5 note, a surprisingly cool decision by the Royal Bank of Scotland, which is more usually associated with acts of total ass-clownery. Now, the reason I want to read this particular one is that when the Scottish Poetry Library saw this image, they asked me if they could use it for an event that they were staging. I think it must have been a centenary or something. And I'm always pleased when people ask me, I'd be even more pleased if they offered to pay me, but that doesn't really happen too often. But nonetheless, I was always delighted to be asked, and of course I said yes. And the following day, I think it was literally the following day, they wrote again and said, by the way, we have exhibition space here. Would you like to have an exhibition? I just about bit their hand off. I was very excited at the prospect of this, partly because I'd already started doing one-off paintings of some of the people that I profiled in Cool Scots. And here I'd started moving away from the purely graphic style. And as you can see, what's going on here is collage in the background, painted, and then screen printed. So once again, I managed to find a very, very awkward way of getting a photograph onto a canvas. Screen printing really is not for the faint of heart. It's a maddening process, and combined with the painting and the collage, I think I probably scraped off as much paint and ink as I actually applied. It really was an ongoing battle. So some of the others, Robert Burns, of course, you can see Burns's actual handwriting applied in the face there. Jackie Kay was delighted with her portrait, which was great news to me because Liz Locklight really hated hers. I suppose that's just one of those things. Ivor Cutler, of course. The reason Ivor Cutler keeps coming up is that when I asked people, who would you nominate as a Cool Scot, I swear to God, most people said, "Oh, Ivor Cutler." That was the top of everybody's list, and that was quite surprising to me. But anyway, I've always had a lot of fun with Ivor. And by the way, there's a lot of RAF stuff going on here because Ivor was in the RAF, and in fact he was grounded because he was too interested in clouds. That's what actually they said. Too interested in clouds. This is Jesse Kesson, and somebody here will know this painting very well. And that's how this came about. So, what can I say here about Walter Scott? And I really didn't know anything about Walter Scott when I did this. I knew that it's a very silly Rob Roy film with Liam Neeson. But what I did know was the original painting, and the painting to me is always, there's a very iconic image, the original Henry Rayburn thing. And of course, for me, if it's iconic, that means I can defile it, and have a lot of fun there. The original's in the National Portrait Gallery, and because of this, I invited curators to allow me to give them a guided tour of the exhibition, which surprisingly they accepted. Naturally, I hope this might lead to my version landing up with the original, but so far it's still hanging in my living room. So the idea of reimagining Scott was once again about taking an existing image and lifting it out of the age in which it was created in order to make a sort of jarring effect. If you can imagine young people in particular, looking at the original Rayburn oil painting, you can see they might find it hard to get beyond the 19th century formal wear and the austere old master treatment. And if you remove these barriers, they might actually wonder who this person is. And if that sounds shallow, then I think anything that gets young people interested in writers would be my defense. So for this exhibition, which was 2 years ago now, I was thinking I'd done a whole lot of portraits. I think there was 12 poets, but there was about 30 paintings in all. And I was thinking, I really need a kind of centerpiece. These paintings, they were all kind of about, about sort of bigger, slightly bigger than life size. And I thought, I really could do with one that's actually quite big. And then I remembered this, also in the National Portrait Gallery, Alexander Moffat's Poets Pub. And once again, I'm like, this is iconic. I'm just going to have to do my own version. So I took all the poets that I'd done individual paintings of and transplanted them into Bennett's Bar in Tollcross, because that's where I always used to drink. And there's a few details here. You see Walter at the back here. He's wearing a T-shirt with one of my books on it. The only reference to poetry is the Merry Muses of Caledonia, which of course is total filth. And that made me laugh. And right next to it, there is a Torfiken in beer mat. So I was always just, once again, having a bit of fun. And again, yes, again I wondered if the portrait gallery might be interested. But instead the poetry library bought this painting. And that's Alexander Moffat there, with his copy of Cool Scots. So I guess he didn't hate it that much. So, coming back to Walter, so Walter Scott died at 61, and having produced a massive body of work, included 27 novels, and this is a huge kick up the backside to me because I am 61 now, and to date I've published one. And so I'd like to conclude with a short reading from my modest contribution to the Scottish novel, 6 Degrees of Stupidity. And this is part of a stupid trilogy of books. The Unbearable Stupidity of Being is finished, and I'm hoping to get that published later this year. And Stupid Animals is the third one, and I'm not long since, so I think I'm 2 chapters into it. So don't hold your breath. So if I could just give you a little background about the story. It's a novel, obviously, so I'll just fill you in a little bit. The book is a parody of Conrad's Heart of Darkness, and instead of being set in the Belgian Congo, it's set in the canals of Englandshire. The Marlowe character is a hapless graphic designer called Tony Boakes. Tony has been told that to prepare for all the canal-side pubs he'll visit, he'll first need to get in training by eating a lot of fish pie and drinking heavily. And in this scene, he's joined by his inventor friend, who is known as the Admiral. And this chapter is called A Cause for Alarm. I was a little tender following the previous night's training session, but remembered the faculty quack, Dr. Seward, warning this might happen. "What do you do if you fall off a horse?" he asked. This was clearly part of his intelligence test, and I'll be honest, it kept me guessing for some time. I suggested a bike, and even questioned whether the journey was necessary at all. Eventually, he said, "You get back on again." The metaphor was obscure to me, as I'd never spent much time in the country. Once I mistook a sheep for a puma in the Pentlands. Eventually, I gathered he meant I would have to suffer some more. I told the Admiral I needed him to assist me with my training schedule, and that he could act as coach. He said he was happy to help, and as he hadn't had a drink for a few days, he could probably do with getting into shape himself. But he reminded me that the Rowantree was out of bounds for him due to an unfortunate incident last year when his polymer bouncy balls became unruly. Why he thought it was appropriate to demonstrate how to make bouncy balls in a city centre bar is still unknown, though I have to say it was one of our more memorable nights out. The Admiral said the malt loaf often had a puddle of water outside after sufficient rain and could easily pass for a canal-side pub, so we decided the training session would be held there instead. I stopped in for him on the way, and he showed me a new contraption he'd cobbled together from discarded pieces of circuitry and an old record player. In essence, it was an alarm clock. At the specified hour, the device would spring to life, activating the turntable and lowering the stylus arm onto the record. Result, you woke up to the gentle sound of a Chopin sonata or koto music from Japan. He hadn't tried it yet, but he assured me it would be 100% effective. And I'm just going to skip forward. Several hours have passed, and they're getting ready to leave the bar. And there's predictable results. There was a limit to how far we would get in such a condition, and with the Admiral's flat being nearest, it was decided it would be far enough if I could reach his sofa. En route to the sofa, the Admiral explained he had an early start as he had a couple of days' work at the hospital devising a way of keeping tags on runaway patients. He said it would be an opportunity to test his new alarm clock, and were it not for runaway patients, he would have no use for such a gadget. "I'm going to make doubly sure I don't sleep in," said the Admiral, his last words of the evening, as he set the device for 7 a.m. and left me muttering incomprehensibly about kotos. I slept as if consigned to a morgue, but was awoken by the gentle stirrings of Motorhead's Ace of Spades at a level likely to have been set at the Admiral's last party. It was a testament to his electronic ingenuity that the device actually worked, but it didn't work for long, as a high-velocity boot was soon heading towards it from the direction of the sofa. So, thank you very much for having me. I have books for sale here. If you're not interested in them, I have these postcards, and I would dearly love everybody just to take one or however many they would like, because I have Walter and the Poets Pub and Robert Burns and various people. So once again, thank you for having me.
Well, thank you ever so much, Greg, for that talk. I think it's fair to say we've seen Robert Burns, Nan Shepherd, Walter Scott, as we have never seen them before. But in a way as well that I think that, for me certainly, it made them feel a bit more familiar and a bit more likely that they might be in the drinks reception afterwards as well. It was also fascinating to hear about your process behind creating those works as well, so thank you ever so much. So if you're happy to, we'll open the floor for some questions.
Oh, sure.
So if anybody has any questions,
When I was a lad in the 50s, early 60s, there was a bunch of what they call comics rather than graphic novels called illustrated classics. Fantastic. Dumas, Stevenson, Scott, a lot, I don't know. And it was a good way. You talked about getting kids interested in writers. I mean, that was a great way of getting kids into good literature. You might enjoy the comic and then go on to read the novel. And that doesn't seem to be around anymore. There's lots of graphic novels. They don't seem to be about serious writers. I mean, is the market dead for that? Is it possible? I mean, it just struck me as a good way to try and get people in, but it may not be possible.
That's a very good question. I mean, the graphic novel genre is unfathomable to me. It's so vast in itself that I'm not sure if it's eclipsed the sort of books that you're talking about. I certainly remember seeing them. But honestly, I don't know where to start with graphic novels anymore. I mean, I go into a Forbidden Planet, and it's a whole other world. I would get lost in there if I spent any time in there.
Your whole industry from Dundee's centre of all it, Daisy Thompson, and the graphics, and now their cartoon skills with the technology. The Japanese apparently have these graphic novels, and they're a total genre all to themselves. Anyway, I've got this wee idea in my head for your next job. Andrew O'Hagan has just brought out a Dickensian scale of a book called Caledonian Road. Yes? You might come back to Scotland and do a book launch on that, but I think you ought to apply him for the contract to illustrate this Caledonian Road. Note number 2, you mentioned Robbie Bund. He's just a fund of resource in the Maclaurin Gallery of Ayr, they're in Roselle Park. It's just about half a mile from the old Robert Russell Cottage. There's one noted artist, Gaudi, I think, and his son is at Glasgow College of Art. Well, Gaudi Senior does wonderful murals, and you've almost you're a second cousin to Gaudi the Elder there, so that was another.
Tam O Shanter. Okay.
Yeah. And then today I had to go and check out a charity in the all places, the fire station of Dunfermline, and it is entirely devoted to Sandy Moffat at 80, and it's just extraordinary. So you're going to cut the coffee in there for one thing to give them a double take new exhibition. And third and last, not to take away from the whole rest of what the ideas come. I had the honour to be the treasurer of the Poetry Library for too many decades. But at last year's AGM, I saw your handiwork. Magnificent.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
Are your books available on Kindle? Because I do wonder whether young people now, when it came to reading, would rather have a book on a Kindle rather than an actual book such as you have here this evening. The young think a different way.
Yes, I agree, and I can't possibly count myself amongst the young. So yes, I don't know, and I never actually got around. I did look into it. There's an awful lot of formatting issues, and I didn't actually understand how anybody could, frankly, make any money out of doing that. It seemed like any time I went anywhere near Amazon was making more money, and I, got a few pennies. So I didn't spend an awful lot of time on it. But then that's not to say that you're not absolutely right.
Yeah, the technology of reading has changed. Yeah.
I agree. Yes. Sorry.
Using so much photographic material, I'm a retired lawyer, so I'm going to say something
Yes.
terrible here.
Yes.
But do you ever run into copyright issues?
Well, no, because the key word, I'm sure you're aware, is transformative. And as long as you are transforming it into something completely different, and I think well, you've seen that what I'm doing could not be mistaken for Henry Raeburn's work, for example.
It's close.
What about Andy Warhol and his cans of beans? I mean, that's just
Same thing.
Well, actually,
one way, it's just completely deconstructive.
Well, it's funny you should mention Warhol, because he was actually the subject of a recent court case when the estate was taken to court over a portrait of Prince, the singer, and the court ruled that in fact it was not sufficiently transformative. So I'm obviously pay a lot of interest, a lot of attention to stories involving those types of cases.
So your transformative stuff it's unique to you, and there's a style. There's a lot of things that you're doing that remove that. Like I was not guessing who it is. That's very impressive.
Thank you. I think that's right, and also I've been doing it for so long now that anybody who wanted to have a go at me, you would say, look, there is a massive body of this stuff now, And yeah, once again, the word transformative.
You can't hold him by any chance. Sorry about intervening.
Yes, I thought I recognised them. Yes.
Oh my goodness gracious.
Yes, I was thinking when I saw the Poets Pub, that's who that guy is.
Can I ask a question?
Yeah.
We talked at the beginning, Greg, about screen printing and about the process of being through that. You mentioned the advent of the Macintosh computer, which obviously had a transformative effect on how people make images, and now we're moving into the AI territory. Would you like to talk just briefly on what techniques you use, or you use all of them, I suspect?
Yes, and I mean, in fact, the one that I haven't quite got to yet, and I'm looking forward to, is AI, because I've been aware of this because when I was first reading about this, I went on Twitter and just posed a question. Can somebody tell me how this works? You know, and somebody sent me an example of, it was an image that I'd created, but what they'd done was describe the image to an AI machine, and then the machine produced what it thought was similar to, and I mean, it was completely different, but it was obviously cartoonized, and there were monsters and all kinds of crazy things going on. But anyway, I printed out that conversation because I always just thought, right, I'm going to keep that. I'm going to go back and look at that because I find that all quite fascinating. And obviously, if you're using a lot of cut and paste type techniques, it's a very obvious one.
Yes.
Was that the question, Cal?
Yeah, and I just wondered if you use Photoshop, or are they screen prints in the end, or are they digital prints?
Yes, they're all mainly canvases now, or done on card. They are physical artworks now. And the bigger ones are screen prints. The smaller ones I can run through a digital printer, which is a lot easier. Oh my God.
Thank you. I could ask you lots more about that. I don't want to get too technical.
Could I just make a point? I don't know if you approached the poet Don Patterson, who comes from Dundee, because Don's father was a colourist for the Beano, and when I mean a colourist, he did the colouring in, you know.
Right, yeah.
And Don writes about this in his recent biography, Toy Fights. And I think he'd be a great subject for transformation, quite frankly.
Mm-hmm. I'd agree, and believe me, when I'd done the Cool Scots book, I was still collecting more
He'd be a very good subject to do it with as well. And
Yeah.
I'm sure he'd tell you about his father's days with D.C. Thompson.
Yes, no, you're absolutely right. That does sound interesting. And in fact, last year, I did a few others that got printed in a Sunday paper, and one of them was a very unusual Dundee painter turned circus performer. And yes, that doesn't happen very often. There's a guy called Ansel Stronach. This guy was a member of the RSA. He was an academician. At the age of 30-something, he turned his back on painting and joined the circus. And that to me was just like, because I often make jokes about, I'm going to give this up and join the circus, just running away from it. But this guy actually did that. But yes, I mean, if we could chat later, I'll make a note of that.
I'll give you his contact details.
Thank
I'm
you.
sure he'd be absolutely delighted. And he'd be a good subject for you to get to know, I think.
Agreed.
I had a wee question, if I may,
Sure.
about the sort of sets of images that you showed us, the sort of the beginning ones that were sort of graphic from the Cool Scots, and then the second set, which the screen prints. And I wondered when we were all sort of either saying, oh yes, that's who that is, or guessing. I think a lot of us were looking as well as at the face, which obviously was intentionally changed to look more modern, therefore harder to kind of recognise, but looking at some of the peripheral items as well. And then sort of that was harder to do in the second set of images, which obviously the faces were more instantly familiar in some way. And I just wondered, I suppose taking Scott as an example, with that second set of images, whether or not there was anything about Scott that led you to choose the eyebrow piercing and the tie, or if it was just a sort of, those became tools to modernise and kind of jolt, as you said.
It was the latter, really. I mean, I think I should be able to get that image back up. What I did with these ones is the collage elements are all made up. It's fairly clear on this one. You can see statues of Scott and there's Ivanhoe and things. All of the backgrounds are made up of things that relate to the artist. And yes, they're slightly more obscure in these ones, but I think it's really just because of the technique of painting on top of them, whereas before where you've got a hard graphic style, it's everything's very clear cut.
Thank you. And I think with no more questions just now, then I'd like to invite Professor Callum Corlin to give the vote of thanks.
Thank you. Greg, I'm delighted to be asked to do this vote of thanks tonight. And in fact, this is the first vote of thanks I've ever done. And I asked David, what should I do? What do you do in a vote of thanks? And he said, well, just run a few things from the talk that sparked your interest. So I started scribbling down lots of things here. So much so that my pen broke and ink leaked all over my fingers. So it's a bit messy and I probably can't read it. The thing is, there were so many interesting aspects to this talk tonight that I just ended up writing down random words here and there. And of course I teach at Duncan Johnston College of Art and Design, which is now a part of University of Dundee, which probably wasn't when you were there.
Yeah, that's right.
Because Greg was probably there a few years after I was, because I was also a student at Duncan Johnston. And I've been teaching there now for, I think, 30 years, just over 30 years. So I've seen a lot of transformation in that time. However, that bar across the road that was called McGonagall's is still there, though it's no longer called McGonagall's. And it did, you reminded me a lot of things of those days. The art school is amazing because it's the same building as it was when I was 17 years old when I went there. But it's so transformed, and the way that Scotland is so transformed over these years. Because Greg and I, I've got a few years on him, but we're from a similar generation where kind of weren't really brought up with politics very much as or certainly, how shall we say, Scottish-centric politics were not part of our dialogue, and Scotland's changed so much in that way. However, I've noticed over the years, and I've met many artists, and an awful lot of artists are not interested in politics. Neither are they interested in literature or poetry, things like that, things I was always very interested in, having field my O-level art. So it's great for me to see someone engaging with collage, with photography, all these things I've been writing down. His wonderful words on Duncan Johnston, magnificent, which I can only agree with. McGonagall, Burns, Elvis, Jacobites, portraiture, Motorhead, and all that in politics. Before we even go on to painting, collage, photography. A very kind of rich palette of discussion tonight. So really, I'm delighted. I'm delighted for Duncan Johnston to have such a talented alumni and such a talented fellow artist. So I just like everybody to thank Greg for this.
And yes, just to bring everything to a close, I'd like to just give you advance notice, if it's not already in your diaries, the next event that we have for the Edinburgh Scot Club is on the 9th of May. It's the 114th annual dinner, and I believe there are just a few tickets left, a mere handful, so if you don't have them yet, I think you have to move quite quickly to get those last few. Of course, as we often do, we're going to be able to enjoy refreshments, a glass of wine, a soft drink, canapes afterwards, so if you're able to stay, that would be wonderful. So my very final thanks go, of course, to you also for coming this evening, so thank you for coming, and of course to our speaker, Greg, this evening for a really fascinating talk, a really thoroughly enjoyable evening, so thank you very much.